Welcome to the Edifice Complex, the Property Design and Development Podcast. Let your hosts Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean keep you up with who is innovating and doing great work, perspective on the adjacent possible, and challenges to the status quo.
Welcome to the Edifice Complex. I'm Robert Bean, your co-host and unofficial mediator, here with my colleague, official agitator, emphasis on agitator, and Yoda, most everything to do with buildings, Mr. Sir Adam Muggleton. How you doing, sir?
Not bad. So I'm going to call this Whale Monday because we got the whale here, right?
Exactly. Like many of our guests, we really could spend a half hour reading his resume. We're not going to do that. The short form is he earned his bachelor and then his master's, and then went on to get his MBA, all through Penn State University. And we've had a lot of great people on from Penn. It really is legendary in terms of the people it's produced for our industry, for sure. During his career, he's worked with some big names. A few people, you might know them, York International, Johnson Controls. Today, Baltimore Aircoil. I didn't know this, but he'd been awarded 22 U.S. and international patents. That's pretty good on a resume. And serves today as the executive board member of the local Boy Scout Council, and we'll talk about that, and as a youth hockey coach. He is an ASHRAE Fellow, received the ASHRAE Exceptional Service Award in the 2023, and for the 2025-2026 period has become our ASHRAE Society President, taking the theme of healthy buildings to a global audience. Bill McQuade, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Robert. Good to be on here with you both.
Yeah. Bill, when I heard about your presidential message and was asked to serve on your advisory committee, I was, to say the least, elated. The message resonates with me and has for my entire career. And I also was looking forward to the opportunity to get to learn about you, Bill McQuade, the person. You have a love for a lot of different things, and I think our audience needs to know about who is Bill McQuade, the young man entering engineering college, to today where he's providing leadership for over 50,000 people in 130 different countries. So why don't you share a little bit of that story?
Sure. Well, my dad was an Air Force pilot, and my original interest in mechanical engineering was because I didn't have good enough eyes to be an Air Force pilot. I wanted to design jet engines. And so I attended Penn State because they had a great turbo machinery and gas turbines program. And I graduated in 4 years with taking all the electives I could on fluid flow and heat transfer and all of that. And when I graduated, the engine companies weren't hiring. There was a pullback on defense spending, and there was no jobs to be had. And I decided, well, I'll stay for my master's degree. And I got the grad assistantship or research assistantship that I got was with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ralph Webb. And Dr. Ralph Webb, former head of heat transfer for the Train Company, was a guru in enhanced heat transfer. And he was all about the HVAC industry. And he had research projects that were funded by a coalition of HVAC manufacturers. And I specifically worked on the transition away from ozone depleting refrigerants, CFCs, to HCFCs and HFCs. And I did comparisons of different alternatives and how they performed on boiling tubes for like chillers. And that got me to understand not only the industry, but how the industry can have a huge impact on the environment, because we were trying to close. People forget that there was an ozone hole, that there is an ozone hole, but it was expanding. And because of the Montreal Protocol and our transition away from CFCs, that hole is closing. And I just saw an article saying that it's actually closing faster than they expected it to. So here was an
Wow.
opportunity to make a huge impact in the environment and on the health of society by working in this industry that I knew nothing about beforehand. So that kind of hooked me on the importance of this industry. And then, working on energy efficiency, where that, again, helps the environment, it helps business, it helps people, and then kind of just, as you might imagine, as you get into IEQ, all the other opportunities to help humanity, I was hooked. So that's how I got into this industry. And I started working, actually, one of the sponsors of that early research at Penn State was York International. And that's who hired me coming out of college to work there. And again, worked on transitioning their products to the non-ozone depleting refrigerants.
Yeah, that's cool. We had a previous guest on, David Holtzclaw, and same, very similar story. He was on his way to NASA, actually. He was accepted one of, what was it, 100, one out of 100 people that Adam?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was an ASHRAE, right?
Yeah,
Official
and
candidate.
then they killed the program.
Yeah.
So, so what do you do now, right? You're supposed to become a space junkie or jockey, and so and that's a great story that people need to hear, that that when you graduate and you think you're on a certain trajectory, and then things change, and what you do with that change is incredibly important.
Actually, that's a good thing. Let's just double click on that a bit, right? So, no, let's be honest, no one knows what they're doing when they go to university, right?
Yeah.
But you effectively, so you wanted to be an Air Force pilot. You're effectively Top Gun of like the engineering nerds, right? You're like,
Yeah.
you're Maverick for sort of ASHRAE. But I noticed in your career, right? So you start off, you go to university, obviously you get your degrees, you then do an MBA. So you've had your foot in two worlds. You've had your foot in the engineering world, but you're also heavily in the policy and advocating and lobbying world, right? So how did that transition happen?
So because I had been involved in the refrigerant transition, and because our industry is very regulated because of the amount of energy that it used, I got involved in ASHRAE and AHRI, and over in Europe, Eurovent, EPE and Eurovent. And it was very important that we participate, because that regulation affects how our industry designs products and sets performance standards, that you're at the table at those negotiations. So I was my participation through these industry organizations where we engaged with regulators and legislators about, requirements for our industry. It kind of got me into that world where I was participating. I also became very involved in the Montreal Protocol process, particularly around the negotiations that ended up with the Kigali Amendment. So again, doing government affairs types of work, so advocacy, it really got me kind of involved in that world, and I found that I had a bit of an aptitude for that. It's one thing to have the technical background. The other thing is to be able to understand and operate within in a governmental kind of, situation where you're engaging with people who maybe aren't technical in nature. So you have to be able to take technical concepts and distill those down, but you also have to have some, interpersonal skills that you're required when you're doing negotiating. So I happened to find that I fit in that role fairly well, and then having the technical background allowed me to be agile in those negotiations, because I didn't have to call back and get an answer. I usually knew what direction to go. So I just I never thought I'd be doing government affairs. It's the title that I have now at Baltimore Aircoil, government affairs and sustainability. But it's just, like you said, Adam, when you're in college, I never thought I'd be in this position, but I find that it fits me well. And, it's, kind of my engagement in ASHRAE kind of grew out of that also. And I learned you had to be at the table and you didn't just sit there, you had to be engaged.
Yeah.
And that was the best way to make a difference and move forward. And that's kind of, I've rolled that into everything in my life. Even, you mentioned, Robert, my engagement at, with the local Boy Scout Council. You either sit in a room or you do something, and I'm more
Yeah.
of a do something kind of person.
Yeah. I witnessed several times during our meetings, during your sort of your build up to your presidency, relying on your committee and being very patient and listening to what the advice was coming from and then adopting that advice. That ability to be open to suggestion without rubbing your ego the wrong way. Where did that come from? Is that something was your father like that? Was your mother, or is that something you've learned over your lifetime?
I think I learned that over my lifetime, but also some mentors within, the businesses that I was in, the ones that seemed to listen and then make a decision rather than kind of pontificate and make a stand tend to make better decisions. The other thing, Robert, and you're very much included in this, when I looked at creating my president-elect advisory committee that you participated on, I pulled in people who were experts in their areas, not necessarily just someone who I was good friends with and trusted. I brought in people who were expert in their areas because I didn't want to be the smartest person in the room. I wanted to be the one that was learning. It's easy to defer to others when they know a lot more about it than you do. But that's, I wanted to get the best advice that I possibly could. And if you look at the expertise of the people that were on that committee, and I'd say I've replicated that in other parts of my career, where I bring in the best people and you listen to them. And sometimes you even sprinkle in the contrarians just so that
Absolutely.
you don't have an echo chamber. I think that's very important also.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We were talking about this earlier with somebody else that, the 4 stages of learning: unconscious incompetence, conscious competence. No, hang on a second. Unconscious incompetence, conscious competence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Basically, you start out, you don't know what you don't know, and then you begin to learn what you don't know, and then you learn what you learn, and then you get into, auto drive, autopilot. And we've always said that the worst place to be is stage 1 and stage 4, because in stage 1, you get hit by the bus, and stage 4, you're driving the bus, right? Because you're arrogant and you think you know it all.
Yeah.
Where real learning takes place in stage 2 and stage 3. And I observed you in those stages 2 and 3, being the consummate student that you are all the time, learning about something. And there's a huge lesson for that for everybody in whatever field you're in.
Yeah.
Never to get to a point where you think you know it all. That's never a good place to be.
Yeah, I'm still learning. I mean, I every time I go to like the IEQ 2025 conference that we had, or I just came back from Greenbuild last week. And at Greenbuild, I spoke there about healthy buildings, but I got a chance, which I haven't had a lot of opportunity lately, to sit in sessions and just learn. Man, that's glorious, right? And there's so much with IEQ that I'm learning, from folks like you, Robert, and Bob Bocock on water, and it just goes down the list. Marwa on IAQ. There's
big fan.
there's so yeah, there, there's so much to learn. And I don't know. I get excited about my career again because there's more opportunities and more things to do. So
Yeah. That was one of the things about the team that you built. And I'm sure, and I have to think that almost every presidential team has similar characteristics in terms of everybody's enthusiasm and passion. And you do build on it. And I mean, early on, when you start to see who's at the table and you think, like, how did this happen? How was I so lucky to get a chance to sit at the table and have dialogue with other experts in the field? And yeah, it was amazing to have that experience. So thank you for that, by the way.
knows. You were
So
definitely a ringer on that team. So.
let's talk about ASHRAE. I mean, ASHRAE is a very significant institution, right? And it has reached way beyond its borders in the US. Yep. I find people either love or hate ASHRAE. Some people think it's this big engineering blob like the Borg cube, flying around. My criticism of ASHRAE is that obviously it's very US centric as a US institution, but I think it underestimates the impact it has in other markets. I work in the Middle East where most engineers, just to make sure they don't get fired. So I'm fascinated with engineering culture in different places, right? So in Dubai, for example, you've got American engineering culture, British, European, local, and it's all mushed into this mixer. So if you're an engineer there, you think, you know what, I'm just going to specify everything so I don't get fired. And you wind up with this thing that's almost impossible to meet. I think, and that's sort of a bad example, but ASHRAE is a little bit like NFPA in that its clout is really international. And I wonder how much credence that gets at the board level. Is there a sort of attention to that, or is it a byproduct of being ASHRAE?
Oh, no, there's definitely attention to that. And there's a desire to do even more, right? And I think, in the past, when I started my career 30 some years ago, there wasn't much else out there other than ASHRAE. So, it was kind of ASHRAE guidance in the built environment was kind of default. And you could even argue that AHRI guidance on performance of equipment was kind of default. And that was mainly because everything was exported out of the US or Europe into the rest of the world. But, over that 30 years, the different markets have become more sophisticated. You have local manufacturers of equipment, and there's a desire now to really tailor some of that guidance to specific regions or markets. So I do think that ASHRAE is very conscious that, our standards, although we talk a lot about making them global and all of that, really don't fit the full bill in each of those areas. And we've just recently created an entity in the tech council, really looking at kind of how do we harmonize or work to specifically focus on standards in areas that are outside of North America. So that's something that we definitely work on. And the other thing that's really hit me as I've traveled around, although different organizations may not specifically talk about ASHRAE, we do influence a lot in what content comes in their own standards, or in the case of like USGBC with LEED or WELL, or any of those other types of rating programs. ASHRAE is kind of the intel inside, kind of the research and guidance that ASHRAE provides is kind of the basis for a lot of those different things around the world. And so, you might have Eurovent or standards that are developed by Riva or SASO in Saudi Arabia, or one of these other places, but they generally look at what ASHRAE has done and then build from it. So from that standpoint, I do think that we are very relevant, and that gives us also a responsibility to make sure that we're getting feedback locally. And I think that's where we've stumbled in the past. We've had a bunch of folks in North America thinking that they know what's best for the rest of the world. And I think what we're seeing now is with the growth of ASHRAE and having, the regions and the ability to move experts in those areas forward in the organization, that we're getting a lot more impact and feedback from those areas, and we're putting out better content because of it. So I wouldn't say we're where we need to be, but I do think there's a deliberate effort to pull more of that in so that we are relevant globally.
I think one of the things that the benefits of traveling so much is you do get a big perspective on the world and where you fit within the world. And I constantly have to remind myself that collectively between the United States and Canada, I think we represent maybe 4.8 or 5% of the world's total population. Like, we're just not that big,
Yeah.
And having had the opportunity to travel to the Middle East as, a DL, an ASHRAE DL, and you get to see the enthusiasm and the passion and these chapters that we have overseas that are attracting really well turned out events, like hundreds of people, and it's really rewarding to see that and then come back to North America and see our own culture, but also taking joy in the fact that our chapters are coming back strong too after COVID, particularly. I mean, a lot of our chapters took a big hit. I remember traveling overseas, seeing hundreds and hundreds of people attend ASHRAE meetings, coming back home and maybe getting, like in some of the smaller regions, maybe 20, 30 people out to a meeting. And you have to remember that we took a real kicking in some of our chapters but they're coming back. Then people are starting to show up again, and that's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. The other thing I think that makes ASHRAEs unique is there's not the kind of politics that you might see in other organizations. If you walk around an ASHRAE meeting, no one is wearing their company pin. They're wearing their ASHRAE pin
Right.
on their lapel. And there's really kind of a call to do good for the industry and to do good for the society rather than personal or company interests. And that, I think, is very different than, for instance, a trade association, whether it's in the US or in Europe or any other place. There's really an emphasis on doing the right thing from a technical and from a societal standpoint. And that I find is unique. The other thing is there's an opportunity to move forward in ASHRAE if you do good work. People who tend to be doers are the ones that move up in the organization. So it could be, one of our young engineers, that we have this YAY organization for young engineers in ASHRAE. People get noticed in what they're doing, in their committee, and that gets them an opportunity to participate in some of the other standing committees within ASHRAE. And ASHRAE does a great job of promoting the youth, whether it's students or young engineers, by giving them leadership training and things like that. So I think part of our growth is being fueled by kind of a youth movement, if you will, and which comes at a good time because of demographic shifts in our industry, where we have a lot of seasoned professionals that are retiring. So
actually, let's double click on that a little bit. I mean, I'm a little bit morbidly fascinated by how much talent was it? I think the statistics I read recently are 10,000 people a year. Was it a day? Sorry, no, it's a day in the US are retiring. So there's a percentage of them who are like practitioners, engineers, tradespeople. So that creates a vacuum of some degree, right? And
very much so.
I'm starting to see it show up in jobs where there's delays because you can't get certain people. There's a sort of growing level of incompetence, for want of a better word, at a sort of like a macro level and a meso level. Really, it's just noticeable. Things aren't getting done right in certain places, and it's sort of troubling. If you're a client, I'm thinking, how do I secure the A team here, right? I mean, are you seeing that in?
Oh, very much so. Last year, Dennis Knight, who is our president, focused on workforce development. And as part of that, we had industry roundtable meetings at each of one of our regional conferences. And ASHRAE has 16 regions around the world. And so at each of those regional conferences, we would sit down with local engineering firms and contractors and even manufacturers and ask them, what are you seeing from a workforce standpoint? And what we were hearing is exactly what you talked about. You've had, in most cases, the baby boomer generation is retiring, and the next generation after that was one of the smallest in recent history. So you have a gap just in just bodies, right? And then the other thing is that, there's been a bit of a shift where, the kids aren't as practically minded. The days of going out and tinkering with your dad on their car or taking the radio apart or anything like that. No one can work on anything anymore because it's
Right.
all electronic, so there's just kind of that mechanical aptitude. I think there's less of an opportunity for young people to kind of get that kind of experience, ahead of going into school. And then the other trend, I think, and this may be more of a North America thing. I think they do a better job in Europe and in other places. Is you know in the U.S. and in Canada, there was parents pushed their kids not to go to trade school, but to go to college because to get a good salary, you have to go to college. And going to a trade school was almost, there was almost um, a negative thought about that,
Yep.
which is sad because I think you probably have a better opportunity of owning your own business at a younger age in the trades than you do in
100%.
an engineering thing. So really, I think there hasn't been enough of a flow of youth into the trades. And at the same time, buildings have gotten a lot more complex, right? We have all these high performance buildings that use automation and, controls used to be pneumatic and now, you have smart sensors all over the building that have their own, kind of routines that they do. And kind of, you almost have to be half an IT professional to run a building now on top of mechanical skills. So what we're hearing from all of those companies that we sat at the roundtables is there's a lack of training, and even the kids, the young people coming out of college, they have maybe book smarts, but they don't have the practical ability, and they've basically had to hire people for fit into the organization with the expectation that they're doing all of the training on their own. And what they've asked for from ASHRAE and from other organizations is more content that they can use to help train people. So that is something that we're working on, not courses that talk about some complex subject, but really fundamental type
How do you do this?
education.
How do you do that? Right. That's what's missing.
Right. And, I know ASHRAE's most successful in-person and now online training programs is the HVAC fundamentals 1 and 2. So it's really the basics of HVAC that you wouldn't necessarily get in a mechanical engineering program at Penn State like I had. There's usually like one mechanical course if you're lucky in mechanical engineering. The architectural engineering programs are much better, but there's not many of those. So it's something where I really think we have to go back and provide the building block type courses and training so that companies in our industry can get their people up to speed.
Yeah. We've talked about this in the past about the difference between someone that gets certified and someone who's qualified. So I'm totally on board with the education part of it. We desperately need education at all levels, from the trades all the way up to the university programs. I guess what the rub in my brain is we get these people that come through these programs with a certificate that, yeah, we've been certified to do this stuff, but we're still not having people that are qualified to do it. And one of the dangers, I guess, is that having organizations where there is no mentorship available for these graduates to go to, like, yeah, okay, we've learned all this information, so academically we have some strength, but who's overseeing my work?
Right.
Right? Until I become confident in what, where I can actually become qualified as well as be certified. And that is a challenge.
Yeah, you think about the old apprenticeship programs that they used to
Right.
have, and you had engineers that maybe didn't even go to college, but they learned what they needed to know through practical application. I really think that's been a huge loss.
Yeah.
When I started working with York in the mid 90s, they still had an apprenticeship program that they were bringing technicians and some of the manufacturing, particularly the machinists, through. and that was a fantastic program. You didn't move forward from one level to the other without showing competence. And I think we've lost that. Whether it's an engineering program or a technical program, I really think, going back to that apprentice kind of structure that worked for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Yep. Would be a good way to get back to what we need.
That is key. People don't understand apprenticeships are about repetition, right? You do it so many times, it becomes unconscious competence. I mean, I did, when I first started my technical education, I got a job. Then they decided I wasn't that stupid. Then they sent me 1 day a week and 2 evenings a night to college. And the beauty of that was when I went to college and got something I didn't understand, I could go into work the next day and go, someone explain this to me, please. And someone would sit me down and go, okay, stupid, you do this, you do, right? If you're just going straight into uni, you don't have that practitioner support, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for engineers, there's always that leap from doing homework problems where you have an example that's kind of like it to approaching something that's new and you have to apply first principles to it. That some engineers do that very well right off the bat, and some it takes years, right? And I think if kind of the way you described it, Adam, if you had that situation where you're actually doing work in the day and you're getting some additional education, and it's like, oh, and I see how that fits in, that can make a huge difference.
Also, it's applied engineering, right? So typically, the reason the architectural engineering degrees are great because they're more applied, right? Whereas if you're doing a pure math, pure physics, pure engineering degree, that's more theoretical. So you haven't got that guy who doesn't really care about you, bossing you around, telling you what to do and what not to do and how to put it right. That's what's missing there, right? I think the future belongs to practitioners and tradespeople. I really do. Anyway, that's another TED Talk.
I'm 100% with you.
Going back to your, about the some individuals, you grasp it quite easily. And I remember when we were hiring engineers for our business, we wouldn't let them touch the computers for 6 months. They had to do hand calculations because we wanted them to become one with the number. So when they were looking at the software and the outputs, that they had that critical eye to say, well, hang on a second here. That doesn't quite look right? So giving them that ability to be critical of outcomes rather than relying 100% on them. And I always felt that maybe you guys can verify this, but it seemed to me that we never became truly comfortable sending someone out on their own to take responsibility for designs for about 2.5 years of practice before we said, okay, well, we can sleep at night knowing that you're going to do good work. What's your experience? Is it 2.5 years, or is it more than that?
Yeah, it depends obviously on the individual, but I think that's about right. About 2 years, and again, it depends on what you give them to do. Like, I was very fortunate. My first boss was Keith Starner, who is an ASHRAE fellow. Keith, he had me. There was a lot of, back in the day, we used a lot of rules of thumb when we were designing chillers and heat exchangers and things like that. But he would assign me an opportunity, or I'll call it an opportunity. He'd give me an assignment to derive how we got to that rule of thumb. So he had me start at first principles and say, okay, get to this, here's our rule of thumb. Try to figure out how we got there. And that was, obviously that had no revenue impact for the company at the time, but I learned a tremendous amount because I was kind of deriving things from first equations, and you get to the thing and, oh, now I understand why it's, 2.4 times this. It's, when it came to, sizing eliminators or something like that. And I figured out, what how they got there. It's convenient to have that little, back of the envelope formula to get you there. But you have to understand where that came from. And I think that's sometimes, today with AI and just graphing calculators and all those kinds of things, I worry a little bit that people lose touch with where things came from, and they're less able to notice right off the bat that something isn't right. You know,
Yeah.
I remember coming to Keith with heat transfer data, and I'd show him a number and he's like, well, there's no way that's right. It's too good. You know, that he always told me it's too good. And then I'd have to go back and you'd find out, yeah, that, you know, some temperature measurement was off or something like that. But, you know, knowing when it's too good, is something that only comes, you know, that wisdom only comes with experience and
Yeah.
a fundamental understanding. So you know, how do we get back to that?
That's
Yeah,
really
that
interesting because
brings
one
us.
of the triggers for me when I was back in the day when I was running, doing engineering work was if someone saw a formula was a constant in it or a coefficient, if they asked me why is that there, that was like a green light for me. That was, oh my God, I love you. You can
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, where did
Asking
that
the
come from,
question.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, that was when I got out of school in 1983. So Mac, was it 1981? When did Apple released the first Mac?
Because yeah, it was the
19
early 80s, very early
It was in
80s.
the early
Yeah.
80s, like 81, 82. So I remember, so 1984, we got our very first Mac. And so we had an ability to put formulas into a spreadsheet. But in order to do that, you had to go through the manuals, whether it was an ASHRAE manual or an industry manufacturer's publication, and you had to create the cell. So you became intimate with the process. Well, today people just go by the proprietary software, and
Yeah,
but they
yes.
don't know what's in the engine, right?
Yeah.
And I think I was really lucky from just timing wise to come into the world where all of a sudden computers were a tool, but we had to put the parts of the engine into the tool.
There's a name for what's going on now. It's called software jockeys. I call them
Right.
software jockeys. It's input, output, and they have no idea what's going on under the hood.
Yeah. Yeah. I wrote so much code in Fortran. And you know, I hated it at the time, but it was a great learning tool. Was every once in a while you get a piece that someone else did that wasn't commented, like didn't explain where things came from, and you'd
Yeah.
have to back into it. And again, it's kind of like those rules of thumb. You'd have to be like, where did this come from? And then you'd have to go through and solve it, and like, that's where it came from. So two things I learned there. One is you know, you got to know your stuff. If you're doing this, you can get wrong answers if you don't. But the second thing is to put comments in all of your Fortran code, which I'm sure that's not used anymore.
Yeah, you're talking thing on right now.
Yeah.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you struggling with paperwork, spreadsheet overload, and project management? Then Blue Rhythm is the solution to help you. Streamline your commissioning and project management process. Go paperless, increase efficiency, and save money. Blue Rhythm is commissioning and project management software by practitioners for practitioners, adapting to your workflows and processes, and doing things your way. Blue Rhythm provides painless and fast onboarding by bringing your existing workflows, forms, checklists, and issues logs into Blue Rhythm for you. You can use their pre-built templates to customize your commissioning workflows. And Blue Rhythm can fully handle the transition from your current software platform. Blue Rhythm is secure, scalable, and reliable, backed by amazing support, and accessible 24/7 on any Windows, iOS, or Android device. Why are you still using paper and hard-to-control spreadsheets? Start your free Blue Rhythm account today at bluerhythm.com.
And now, back to the show.
I want to talk about IAQs. I know this is a subject sort of close to both your hearts here, right? I'm getting old and grumpy, as you probably noticed, Robert.
Hadn't noticed at all, Adam.
Yeah, the intention and that when you read about IAQ and the sort of parameters it tries to address, no, I don't think anyone can disagree with any of that. My disillusion is coming around. It's a bit like sustainability and IAQ. It's like, we actually know what we got to do, but because it's expensive, we're just not doing it, right? We're all talking ourselves in a circle. But, the first time I read the lead IAQ requirements, I remember thinking, could that be awesome if someone actually did that? And I've been looking around for someone to actually do all of it. It's just not really happening. So what's your opinion on the state of play with that right now?
Yeah, I think there's a real awareness, and if there's any silver lining in COVID, I think it kind of reemphasize to people the importance of kind of the way buildings are built and operated and how that can affect human health. And so, I do think as I've traveled around, talking to other organizations outside ASHRAE and folks within ASHRAE, there's an awareness we need to do better. And many times with high performance buildings, it comes at the cost of indoor environmental quality. And if you look at, like the new ASHRAE standard 241, which is a infectious disease mitigation standard, there's ways of doing IEQ well that doesn't come at the expense of energy. If you're smart about how you do it, you can use different methods to reduce the amount of, for instance, outdoor air you have to bring in, and therefore you don't have to condition it. So I think we know how to do energy efficient, and even we're learning how to do buildings that are decarbonized. We know how to do IEQ well. I think we just have to do a comprehensive approach and not compromise on what we need to do. Now the question is, how do you do that at a cost that makes sense? And there's always the push and pull between an operating budget and a capital budget, and sometimes those are different people and different stakeholders, and they don't see the benefit in the long run when they're initially doing that cost analysis. But I think what we need to do as an industry is to look further into societal costs, right? At the IEQ conference up in Montreal, one academic from Belgium talked about, if you look at the cost of aging in your home, it's tens of dollars a day.
Yeah.
If you age in a long-term care facility, that can be hundreds and low thousands of dollars a day. And if you have to age in a hospital, you're talking thousands or tens of thousands of dollars a day. So that cost to society of having buildings that are poor quality and having poorer health at the end of our lives can have enormous costs to society. And if you think about it to a company for their healthcare benefits, I think we need to kind of refocus our that cost analysis when we're trying to justify doing things for buildings. Also, we talked if you think about residential, there's a whole industry on people trying to keep themselves healthy with exercise or supplements or all these kinds of things. People are so focused on that. I don't think the general public understands what impact their own homes have on their health in the long term, right?
VOCs and everything.
Yeah, VOCs and radon and just all of the things. They're so focused on what they're putting in their bodies, which is important, and maybe what they're doing with their bodies, but they don't realize that if their environment isn't good, they could still end up in the place they don't want to be. So that's something I think we need to do a better job as an industry to kind of bring forward that whole thought process about in the residential environment, what you can do in your own homes to improve your health through indoor environmental quality.
Yeah, I would often challenge my audiences by asking them, by a show of hands, how many people here want to die in an institution versus dying at home? And it's like less than 1% of the population wants to die in an institution. Everybody wants to die at home. And housing really is an extension of the institutional healthcare system. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And so I'll challenge them that, well, if the home is seen as an extension of the healthcare system, and a modern healthcare institute is designed for good IEQ, but the house you're living in isn't, like right there, we've set up a trap. And one of the traps that we fall into has to do with our current understanding of ventilation practices for what we assume to be a relatively healthy population. But 50 years from now, that building could be occupied by somebody who's not healthy, who hasn't the ability to have personal hygiene or building hygiene or a combination of both. And all of a sudden, that ventilation rate that was designed 50 years ago is no longer suitable for the building today for its purpose. And and you know this, Bill, you get into these committee meetings, and there is definitely a strong voice for reducing operating costs for ventilation without having the ability to see what the consequence of that is over the life of a building.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we could do as an industry is to understand how important it is to have flexibility in our buildings and in the systems we put in buildings over the continuum that will change. And we need to, I think, accommodate that.
Yeah, and it's particularly acute for, buildings that might house at-risk populations, right? So, you look at, schools. That's one of my passions is healthy schools, and USGBC and other organizations are doing a lot on that. But if you think about, absentee rates, how much you set a young child back in their learning can have lifelong implications.
Totally.
In their potential in their lifetime, and how do you quantify those costs, when you're trying to decide whether you're doing a MERV 8 or MERV 13 filter, or if you're putting indoor air quality monitors. I think sometimes we, I almost think the schools don't want to know how bad their IEQ is, because they know they don't have funding to take care of it. But I think if we highlighted that, if we measured that, I don't think it would be a hard sell to parents to say, look, we need to make these modifications so that your child is healthier and can stay in school, that your teachers aren't out with sickness and you're bringing in substitutes, and that you have an environment that's conducive to learning, and that your kids are healthier, right? Just sick less. And then the same thing on elder care centers. You think about how fragile, you have immunocompromised folks, you have folks, and how often you have high death rates in a year because of flu. I mean, forget about COVID for a minute, just flu and other communicable diseases. We can do better, right? I think we can design, based on what we've learned with COVID and everything else, we can do a better job of designing those kind of long-term care centers, or even just, assisted living type centers, to prevent those kind of transmissions to populations that really are more fragile. So, I think there's a lot we can do and just haven't yet.
You've really sort of defined how to eat an elephant because it's you're talking about the disconnect between government, school boards, and then of course, the occupants of schools. You're talking about socioeconomic influences. I mean, it's a huge thing, but you have to do it one bite at a time. And I think this time, during the COVID era, the work that Bill Baumfliff did, with support of our ASHRAE colleagues, the work that you're doing, it's the direction we have to go. But we have to be really determined and patient, because this isn't going to happen overnight. Right?
Yeah, and that's, as I've traveled and I've attended different conferences and I've talked to folks, like the industrial hygienist and USGBC and WELL and all of those, everybody understands the importance now, and they're really looking for an entity to kind of coordinate efforts. And so that's something that I think ASHRAE, just because of our scope and our size and our influence, as you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, I think ASHRAE can play that role. And it's not about who gets credit. It's about let's figure out that overall roadmap of what needs to be done, identify where there's gaps, and then leverage each, a number of different organizations to get that done in a very timely manner, rather than each of us, taking that bite of the elephant and doing redundant work, and not getting it done. I'd rather divide that elephant up and then each of us take on a piece than to each of us try to eat a whole one ourselves. So,
that's a good idea. Yeah.
you know,
Well, that is one of the things that ASHRAE has done well, is develop these partnerships around the world with other organizations. The IEQGA, is it with the General Alliance, which REVA, ISHRAE, ASHRAE, other organizations. So there is a collective out there. But talk about the role, though, that governments could play in terms of expediting adoption of what ASHRAE and our colleagues around the world understand.
Well, actually, also layer into that, I think ASHRAE is sort of uniquely positioned to influence government, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think they would listen to ASHRAE, whereas Joey Bag of Donuts organization down the road, not so much.
Yeah, and I think that's the power of being a society of individual engineers rather than an association of companies. I think a lot of times regulators and legislators view an association of companies as having a special interest. Yeah. And in the way we promote ourselves as ASHRAE to, when we do our government outreach days and talk to regulators and legislators, is that we're a technical resource for them to make better decisions, right? So we're not pushing a particular product or a particular technology. We're here to help guide them on what policy actions or regulatory actions would make the biggest impact to achieve whatever goals they're trying to achieve. And I think in the past, I would say that ASHRAE has been a little more reactive than proactive when it comes to providing that information. I'd like to see us become more proactive and say, hey, if you're trying to achieve decarbonization, here are the areas you should focus on in years, 1 through 3, and 3 through 6 is this, and 6 through 9 is that, and those kinds of things. I think that we would get better policy, and maybe not have as a lot of times things get passed and then we're like, oh, why did they do that? That doesn't make sense. If you give them a roadmap, it might be a little easier to get things done the right way. So yeah, from that standpoint, I think we all, it's not just ASHRAE, but I think we all as an industry could do better.
Absolutely. If I was king of ASHRAE for a week, which would be a horrible idea, I would find a marketing budget and I would have you on TV or somewhere extolling the benefits of becoming an engineer, like rah-rah in it, right? Mm-hmm. And also, there would be another advertising campaign that said, do you know what school really should be designed as, Dallas with radiant heating and cooling? That way your kids will be safer. Something like that. That would really upset the apple cart a little bit.
Yeah. So with ASHRAE, we do have a student activities committee in each of our chapters, and we have 200 chapters around the world. Each of those chapters, they do make outreach not only to college kids, but and high school kids, but also middle schoolers and elementary school, because that's really where you got to catch them, right? Because in a lot of school organizations, they kind of decide what academic track you're on, coming out of elementary school and going into middle school, whether you're in the upper level math or the lower level math or whatever, and that can have implications on your ability to be successful, as you get further down the road. So we've been, we have a series of books, the Lucy books that are aimed toward elementary school kids, talking about what an engineer is and all the things that an engineer can do. We engage in programs like Future Cities and things like that, where kids look at designing the city of the future. A lot of our chapters participate as volunteers in that, and then of course, STEM type programs. I'm a merit badge counselor for the Boy Scout troop, and I focus on engineering merit badge, the environmental science, energy, all the things that are around our built environment, that I can bring up. So I think that's, each of us, we can do a bunch as ASHRAE, and we can also do a bunch as individuals. But I agree with you. We have to make engineering in general more sexy to the next generation.
Absolutely.
And then we have to do a better job of promoting what we do in the built environment and what impact it has on climate, on health, on however you want to talk about it, energy independence, lowering costs for business, anything. This is, once you get into it and understand it, this is a sexy business. It's just, we're not Patronus Formula One racing, right? That's
My
a lot of
daughter was
mechanical
right.
engineers are looking at that,
Love him or hate him, Elon Musk has done more to push people into aeronautical engineering than anyone, right?
Yeah, right.
He's an influencer, he's a champion of it. He's a stand for excellence of it. And you don't have to agree with what he says, but that's an objective fact. We need one of them for the built environment. I don't know who that person is, or it could be a series of people, but we need that. Somebody who can speak to them at that level, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And maybe that is a campaign of type of some sort now with social media and all of that. We even talk about it in ASHRAE. How do we better educate this next generation that's used to learning things in small format, 6 to 10 minute videos rather than
screen?
Yeah. I remember when my dad would work on the cars, he'd buy this, they call it a Chilton manual, that had
With the
I remember
exploded
those.
pictures.
Yeah.
yeah, and you'd go in and you'd say, okay, how am I going to change a heater core in my, thing? And you'd look on page 904 and, here was this diagram. Now, if you want to do that, you just Google, changing a heater core on a Mustang or whatever. And then you get a 8-minute video that shows you all the steps. It's learning on demand.
Yeah.
And that's something that, we're looking at in ASHRAE. How should our content be ordered and delivered to meet the new generation, the needs of the new generation? That's something that we need to work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
So I'm just checked time. We are coming up on time. I won't be respectful of your time, Bill. I told you we'd keep it to an hour, and we're nearly there.
Yeah.
Well,
so let's just go to a final sort of rapid question from each of us. My one is, for the love of God, can America please go metric? Go.
In college, I was trained in metric, and that's how I thought. And then I got here to the HVAC industry, and we did BTUs and
You set your call back to 1970.
Yeah. So I don't know if we'll ever change, but I don't know. I guess as we get more international, maybe at some point. But
look, I do a lot of work. I used to do a lot of work with the US Corps of Engineers in the Middle East. It was such a problem for them. They did everything in metric in the end.
Yeah.
So I know it's possible.
Right.
It is possible, but that all that makes sense. It's so boring, right? You have to have units that have, are tied to some, ice melting or,
Who doesn't want everything divisible by 10? I love that. Anyway, that's my rant over. Sorry, Robert, you go.
So, Bill, I always like to ask our guests about basically having them give advice to kids in college, mainly addressing things like adversity and when things are difficult. How did you overcome them? What's your words of advice for those kids that are maybe they get out and their career path takes a right-hand turn, or something tragic happens, but they manage to pull through, or where their parents wanted them to go was one direction and they wanted to go another direction, like Marwa.
Yeah.
What is your advice to those kids that are sitting there going, yeah, right, it's tough right now. Like, I just don't know whether I want to keep going.
Well, I think two things. One, you don't have to know it all at this point in your career because it's going to change, right? What I started I started off wanting to design jet engines, not even close, right? And even when I designed heat exchangers and chillers, I never thought I'd be doing government affairs and sustainability for a major manufacturer, but I am. And you kind of have to take the road that's given to you, and don't turn anything down, without trying it first. And the other thing is, if you find something that you figured out you don't want to do, that's valuable information, right?
Yes.
So, even, like, for instance, my son started off in engineering. He did fine, but he's like, Dad, I really don't like math and physics. Well, I don't call, a year and a half in engineering school is not a waste of time. You learn a lot of things there. But if you learn that that's not what you want to do, that's valuable information, because I would rather him do that after a year and a half and go into culinary school, which he absolutely loves right now, than to spend 4 or 5 years doing college and then 5 more years of doing work and saying, I hate this, So kind of, even if it doesn't work out initially, you always learn something from the experience. You always make connections while doing it. And, you might gain some wisdom along the way that helps you, pivot to the next direction. And it always seems that, even I've had a number of different roles in industry, and it always seems that people who I meet or make connections with or build a network with, I guess is the new term, but those network connections seem to always pop up somewhere down the road in a way that I never had anticipated, and make all the difference in the world for where I end up. So trust that you're on the path that you need to be, and you'll figure it out. So that, I guess, that would be my advice. I never turned down an opportunity that was offered to me, even if it was a risk that I was walking away from something that I was perceived to be good at, to try something new. I always took it, and it's made all the difference in my career.
Yeah, good words. Yeah, thanks for sharing those.
Excellent. Okay, look, we'll wrap up there. So thank you very, very much for coming on. Good luck with your presidency, and I hope it all unravels well for you. And remember, when you're overseas, bang that drum, man.
That's right.
And promote metric wherever I go. Right?
Yeah. Could you get a lot of love if you did that? I tell you. No one from the USA, mind you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Anyway,
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks very much, man.
Yeah, appreciate it.
The Edifice Complex will continue in just a moment.
Are you passionate about the built environment? Do you want to learn from the industry's most inspiring, intelligent, and accomplished professionals? Then the companion to this podcast, Wisdom of the Property Crowd, is just the book for you. From Edifice Complex podcast interviews, this book distills the critical thinking, insight, and ideas of some of the property industry's most accomplished and respected practitioners. Each chapter is a synopsis of an hour-plus interview, capturing the takeaways and insights, including diagrams and images, to help explain concepts and ideas. There's also a brief bio about the interviewee and a QR code linked to the podcast episode for those that want to explore further. These are the mentors you wish you had in college. Wisdom of the Property Crowd by Adam Muggleton, available on Amazon worldwide.
And now, back to the show.
Shout out to Bill. Thank you so much for sharing. I don't know anybody that's busier than he is. He's goes from plane to airport to meeting to airport to plane, and it's just the life of an ASHRAE president. And so yeah, a big shout out to Bill, and also to the crew behind him. Everybody at ASHRAE that makes his life possible, and of course also to Baltimore Aircoil. I mean, when you become an ASHRAE president, you're on the road all the time, and you wouldn't be able to do that without support. So shout out to all the people that are supporting him and his team. As an individual, I love his, like a lot of our guests, he's just got a great path, great journey, super humble, right?
Yeah.
And you get a real sense that he is there to serve. how could you not step up and help a guy like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's obviously got ability. Whereas people, I don't think people quite understand what it means to be ASHRAE president, right? The travel, the constant travel, the fact that your company have to keep paying you while you're doing something for someone else, right?
Right.
Right. So shout out to Baltimore Aircoil, as you say. But no, it's not nothing. It's work, it's meetings, it's policy, it's leadership, it's travel and being an ambassador.
Yeah.
It is quite the lift, actually. So, that is clearly not for everybody.
No, it isn't. And he's ideally suited for it. Like you said, he didn't plan on being into government affairs when he was going into engineering college. Like that wasn't even on his radar, right?
I love the fact he says I'm a failed fighter pilot.
So I love that part of him, and in all sincerity, like when we were in the meetings, like he just, when you get into a meeting with somebody that's in charge, they're actually you're looking to them for direction, but it was very much like looking in a house of mirrors, not in terms of sense of fragility, but in terms of a reflection of what you're contributing and what he comes back to you with. Like so you put out and you get back, and that very much to me is as a representation of what Bill McQuade is that you engage with him and you will get back what you put in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's the right man for the job there. I love that. But just the inspiration thing, right? The thing to take away, I think, from this episode is you start college, you think you want to do something, it doesn't pan out. Yet there's still a journey there where he went from like disappointed aeronautical engineer or fighter pilot to like wanting to design engines, to winding up in the built environment, to now becoming the mayor of engineering town, right?
I love that, mayor of engineering town. That's exactly what it is,
But you could argue he's reached the pinnacle, really, of the profession. I mean, that's a pretty rare group, right? ASHRAE presidents. It's a bit like being president of the US. There's only so many around at any time, right?
Yeah. No, that's very true. And a big responsibility too, right? I mean, you are traveling, but you're also, your team that you have around you has a budget. And that budget comes through the membership fees.
Yes, because that's right. So you're working for everybody who's a member.
You are. And so it comes with a huge responsibility, not in terms of the messaging, but also managing the finances that are making your ability to deliver that message on behalf of our members around the world. It's a big, big thing,
Now, I know you're big. I mean, you could have been president, Robert, let's be fair. It could have been you.
No, there's a lot more people, a lot more capable than I am.
Distinguished lecturer lane. So just so everyone knows, Robert has the highest turnout for people when he gives a lecture. Was it someone said Robert has minions? And they all show up in cheer him on. So just, Robert could have been president of ASHRAE, in my opinion.
I'm on the shoulders of much greater
We should
giants.
probably wrap it up on that point, actually.
By the way, there, again, like for those to understand how Bill gets out there, he has an advisory committee that it's around him, and he had a right-hand person who was Dr. Julia Keene, and I got to tell you, there's a woman that we should get her on the show. Man, she knows how to run a meeting. Holy cow!
Which she runs it like Joseph Stalin, does she?
She's very like Bill, very patient and kind, but also very focused. Like we have an agenda, and we need to get onto that agenda and make it and keep it happening. And I've seen her run technical committee meetings in the same way, and I was always duly impressed the way that she runs it. So, Bill had a really good help there with Julia, and so that's just a shout out to her, and we'll try to get her on the show.
Actually, that'd be a good episode.
Yeah.
Okay, man. So look, 3 cheers for ASHRAE, and I'll see you on the next one.
All right, sir. Take care.
All right,
cheers.
Okay.
Bye.
All right.
You've been listening to the Edifice Complex podcast with Adam Muggleton and Robert Bean. See you next time.